Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Employment Committee. I'm Councillor Stuart Brown, Chair of the Committee. I would like to draw your attention to the following housekeeping and safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street, past the University's Park building. To comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. This meeting will be live streamed. Please note that the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones. Therefore, can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you've finished speaking. Members of the public are permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. We have no requests for deputations today. We've received apologies from Councillor Bosher, so we will do introductions around the room, starting with
Dave Ashmore, one of the Fratton councillors.
Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward.
Darren Sanders, Councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copland.
Councillor Charlotte Gerada, Central Southsea.
Rochelle Williams, Human Resources.
Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Services.
Karen Martin, Democratic Services.
Lovely, thank you all very much. Members, does anyone have any declarations of interest that they need to make anyone aware of? Councillor Gerada.
For transparency, I'm a member of Unite and GMB, and I've also just started working for the TSSA. So, 3 trade unions.
Thank you. Councillor Corkery.
Yeah, similar in that I'm a member of Unison and Unite.
Thank you. Members, we come now to the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of July 2024. I'm not planning on going through them bit by bit. Does anyone have any issues arising from the minutes that they want to make us aware of? If not, I will sign them off. Everyone happy? Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Moves us straight on to item 4, sickness absence report. I'd like to invite Rochelle Williams, Assistant Director of HR, to introduce the report.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report, as normal, is to update the Employment Committee about the levels and causes of sickness absence across the Council, and more importantly, the actions that we're taking to try and improve attendance levels across the organisation. The reporting period from the data is a 12-month rolling period from June to June, which is a slight delay on where we are. We've been having a big upgrade on the system over there, so it wasn't possible to update the data and refresh it for the change of meeting dates. And the wellbeing activities are from February to June, and we can update you verbally on some things that have been happening since then. So overall, there's been a slight decrease in absence levels. We expect to see that fluctuate a little bit because, as everyone's just noted and commented, it's really cold outside, so we start seeing the usual seasonal coughs, colds and flus happening. But overall, a reasonably stable picture in terms of attendance levels. There have been some directorates that have seen decreases in short-term absence, and short-term absence is something that we tend to try and focus on because longer-term tends to get more of the support, occupational health, medical there, where short-term is something that we can tend to have more of an impact on. So those services are public health, adult services, HMBS, culture, leisure and regulatory, and ETP, economy, transport and planning. We've also had 3 directorates who have seen a decrease in their long-term absence, and those are public health, culture, regulatory services and finance and resources. The reasons for sickness, again, remain pretty stable since the previous report in March. The top reason for absence remains psychological, which is your stress, anxiety and depression. It's continued to rank our highest reason for sickness, followed by virus, which has continued to be our second-ranked area. And psychological work-related, because we previously agreed to split those, is now ranked 3rd. So that's an area that we'll obviously be paying close attention to. Just to note, because in the previous one we had hoped to make this change, but because of the upgrade to the system we haven't been able to. The musculoskeletal absences have been continued to be recorded and divided into 3 categories. And just, I guess, a forewarning for the next employment committee, we've had the MCR project, which is a project that started to update the Oracle system that we use in relation to teachers' pensions. But in order to update that, we had to have a complete rebuild of the absence system. Hence, we've not been able to get as much data as we normally would. What this means now is that absence will be recorded at assignment and post level as opposed to person level. And it's anticipated that the data that we'll be collating in the future, so for the February 25 report, will be presented in this way. Again, it looks to improve the accuracy of attendance levels, but it may impact our trends analysis, which we'll be able to update you on once we've seen the data. But it's just forewarning you that we may present it in a slightly different way. And being at assignment and post level allows us to, for people who have multiple assignments, so multiple different roles, at the moment it's a person level, so it assumes if you're sick for one job, you're sick for all roles, but that's not necessarily the case, depending on the reason for absence and the roles that you're employed in. So just a little bit of forewarning. And then if anyone's got any questions on the stats, we can come to those. But what I was going to focus on is kind of what we've been working on for the last few months. And we've recruited a wellbeing coordinator because we had a vacancy for several months, so that's really positive. So she's now in place working with us. At the last meeting I touched on, back in November 23, we launched a new employee benefits and wellbeing platform. And this is offered in partnership with VivUp, and it brings together all of the council's staff benefits and health and wellbeing resources into one place. At the last meeting, I said I'd bring you back some statistics, so I have done. So the portal was launched as part of a wider strategy to try and look to improve our employee value proposition. So how can we improve our offer as an employer and become an employer of choice? Since we launched in November 23, we have 65% of our staff registered for the platform, and that compares to 25% who are engaged on the previous platform that we had in place for years. So it's a really, really positive uptake. The platform provides an extensive range of benefits, and I've just focused on a few that I think the committee may be interested in. So the first one is a new online GP service. As we know, getting access to GPs is something that people are really struggling with. So staff are now able to book a free consultation with an experienced GP for themselves or their dependent. It's open 7 days a week, so it's really accessible, and it is online. And we've had, when writing this report, we had 669 employees click on that, so we know that people are aware of the service, and we've had 82 appointments attended. That's over 100 now since the delay between writing the report and coming here. And we've had really positive feedback about that. So people who have got your viruses, coughs and colds, or even people that need to be signposted on to a GP for a more thorough examination, it gets the ball rolling in terms of you've had that medical consultation. So it's a really positive offer. We have Your Care, which is a new wellbeing platform, and this helps employees be proactive in managing their own wellbeing. So essentially you fill in a health assessment and it gives you a score, then it gives you useful tips and resources as to how you can improve your own lifestyle choices and what you can do in order to improve your wellbeing. And again, we look at the clicks because we're all part of the same directorate. We get comms and marketing as well. So we've had over 900 unique clicks onto that in terms of accessing those services as well, which is, again, positive. From a management perspective, to help support attendance and improve health and wellbeing, HR's continue to build on the proactive data-driven approach. So you'll be aware, I mentioned in the last one that we launched our leadership and management framework. We've now added on an additional couple of sessions. One is the proactively managing absence training, and we've had 183 managers attend that since launching, and again have had positive feedback. So that talks them through essentially all the key steps and signs as to how to support staff in the workplace and what early intervention looks like and what support and signposting we have available. We've shared all of this with our trade union colleagues as well, so they know what we're saying, we know what they're saying, so hopefully collectively staff are getting the support that they need from whoever they choose to go and access that from. So the second part is the Managing Workplace Health and Wellbeing module, which again is part of our leadership and management framework. This has again been positively received by our management population, and since the last report we've had an additional 43 managers attend this, taking the total to 180, and that continues to run bi-monthly. And we're fully booked for the sessions that we have in place, and we'll again be working with comms and marketing in the new year to re-advertise that to the workforce. So just in terms of well-being campaigns, as I said, we slightly lighter than we have been in previous ones because we didn't have a well-being coordinator for several months, but she's done some brilliant work in the last few months, the last couple of months that she's been with us. So we've continued to focus on cancer awareness, careers week, men's health, support during pregnancy, neurodiversity, Viv Up wellbeing platform, and the wellbeing champion role. And in terms of our lunchtime learning programme, so this is all online that staff can get together at lunchtime and we have people come in and talk about different topics. We had apprenticeship week, free will writing service, breast cancer awareness, careers support, cash health plan, and we've also had our perimenopause and menopause working group have had some lunchtime learning sessions as well. So I know the request last time was to have a look at what more we could do in the female health space and specifically around fertility and those sorts of things. So that's on our agenda. Now we've got a wellbeing coordinator in place, we can start looking at what that support may look like moving forward. And it's not in the paper, but we'll talk about it next time. But last week we held a wellbeing roadshow in the View over kind of lunchtime in the civic offices. And we haven't gathered all of the feedback from that yet, but it was a really positive event. We had all the providers from Viv Up in attendance, so staff could come along at lunchtime. We had free yoga, free massage. We had a wall of recognition, so proud to work for PCC, that people could nominate colleagues and stuff on there. So we're just collating all the feedback from that that we can pull together, and we'll update you at the next meeting. That was all I was going to say. If there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Members, any questions, comments, observations? Councillor Corkery.
Thank you. Interesting to see the work-related mental health issues kind of now included, because I know that's something we've discussed before. So it's really useful. Thank you for including it on there this time round. In terms of now that data is being reported through, and I'm sure it's been reported through before, but what processes are in place for identifying when there might be trends or hotspots for issues related to kind of work-related mental health issues, so that if there are any kind of underlying structural or kind of organisational issues that need to be addressed, that they're identified and dealt with?
Yeah, so from that perspective, we have been recording that for a little while. It obviously takes a while to build up those trends and build up a picture of what's happening. And now we've got a wellbeing coordinator in post. What was happening before, which paused for a few months, is we provide quarterly reports to directors so that they can understand the reasons for absence within their own areas, and our HR business partners will work with them where necessary to develop plans on what we need to do. I don't think it's a huge surprise in some of the areas as to where they are, and we know there's some job role functionality. Sort of you look at the social workers and the things that they're exposed to. So providing the data to services is the key one, because if we know what's happening, we can look to be more proactive. At a very individual local level, if someone's absent from work with work-related stress, then we strongly encourage a day one intervention in terms of support, so referral to OC Health, what can we do immediately, as opposed to something that's reactive. If something's happened in someone's personal life, sometimes they just need space from the workplace, but if it's workplace, we would recommend day one intervention. But primarily it's data and trying to understand what's happening and working with the staff. So we've got the training offer in place. Our business partners will meet with the directors quarterly, and where necessary develop plans with them.
And has that found any systemic issues, or has it all been circumstantial?
I think there's job roles. There are certainly job roles where we're starting to see trends, but again, I think anecdotally we already knew that. It's just the data will start building a picture as to whether what we were understanding anecdotally is the real reality. But it's a bit, we haven't been able to build the trends of the quarterly data because we've not had access to the data for a few months since June to be able to do that. So we're hoping once in February we go live and we've got everything in place following the project, we'll be able to build a better picture and break that down into services as to what's happening, rather than just the trend analysis at a high level.
Thank you very much. Anything further? Councillor Gerardo.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rochelle, for the report. Really helpful. Just had a few questions. So I wondered if we offer flu jabs as a way to obviously try and control virus flu illnesses. I wanted to ask about why there are so many musculoskeletal sort of issues, if they're sort of related to the job and being sat down, or if it's something else. I wonder if we know more about that. In terms of psychological issues, I just wondered if we know more about what the causes are in terms of like the personal ones, not the work-related, and if we're seeing particular trends in the sort of underlying causes of them. And then my last question was around, I noticed in the appendix that there is a breakdown for like specifically gynecological issues, but I just wondered if and how fertility issues are recorded. Thank you.
Right. Flu jabs, that's an easy one, yes. So we do offer flu jabs. We did review it this year because it has, it's been a decline in people taking up the free offer that we provide, predominantly because the NHS have picked up their offer in terms of who's eligible. So if you're considered in an at-risk category, you will get access to a flu vaccination via your GP, and they get that access prior to the pharmacies having those flu jabs available. So a lot of people have already accessed it before we can get our offer out, but we will offer it, and I think we've said this year that we'll offer it again, and we'll review the data to see the viability of keeping that moving forward. I think we had just over 100, I think, last year, which is still 100, but it's a significant decline from previous years when it's been much higher. In terms of musculoskeletal, it's from what we found, it's not been specifically work-related. There are specific jobs, so care assistants, that will see that trend higher where they are doing lots of moving and handling, perhaps and green and clean, but predominantly it's the age and demographic of our workforce where people are just wear and tear and having to have routine conditions reviewed and those sorts of things. There hasn't been an underlying workplace trend that we've been able to identify as yet. Causes for psychological reasons, unwork related, we don't have anything specific in relation to those trends because they're all dealt with quite uniquely on a one-to-one basis, so we would probably have to get under the skin of that. So I don't have anything specific. I can certainly go back and speak to the teams in a future report to see if we can start building a picture of what people are telling us. But people do talk about things like the cost of living. They do talk about life is just very busy, trying to juggle work, trying to juggle home life, trying to juggle the cost of living. But I can certainly ask to see if we can bring anything back. And gynecological, the question was how was it recorded? I assume specifically things like IVF and those sorts of things. So we do have policies in place around support for IVF, but at the moment there's not anything specific that allows time off for those. It can vary significantly, can't it, in the time that people take. So a very supportive approach, but it's not currently listed as a reason why you would be paid absent from work unless a medical practitioner said you were too unwell to attend work. So we tend to try and approach that in the most reasonable and flexible way that we can in terms of enabling people to attend appointments, working flexibly where they can, where that appointment leads to a bit of downtime. But I think there probably will be more legislation in that space that's got the potential to open that up for us to look into, but nothing more specific at the moment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanders.
Thanks, Stuart. Three things, Rochelle. Thank you very much for this report. The first one is that you specifically mention housing officers as having one of the highest levels of absence for psychological reasons. As the relevant portfolio holder, I would love to have a more detailed chat with you offline about that. I know that there have always been issues with the increasing number of people coming through the doors homeless, that also has an issue with in terms of capacity and also an issue in terms of just the stress of it all. But I think if that's okay with you, Stuart, a more detailed briefing, Rochelle, offline with my portfolio hat on would be highly helpful. The second bit, it relates to the welcome reduction of 494 days in absence, which is great news. Do we know why that's happened? And if the answer's no, that's fine.
Only in terms of what's included in the report. There's not one specific reason, but we've just seen some slight decreases in short-term and long-term absences in some of the areas. But there's not been a magic wand moment where we've solved the problem. I think it's just a multitude of small activities in all of the areas can lead to that overall reduction.
Thank you for that honest answer. That's really, really great. Stuart, if that's okay, can I make a couple of minor suggestions to change the recommendations, if that's all right, which is in the first bullet point to replace the word note with the word welcome. So to welcome the decrease in absence levels across the organisation. And then in bullet point 3, to replace the word note with the word welcome. So let's welcome the activities and interventions undertaken to support attendance and to improve health and well-being. I think those two things might give people a little bit of a lift rather than just merely note it, if I'm allowed to do that, Stuart.
Members, any objections to those two changes? Councillor Corkery.
I'm not entirely sure it's an objection, but I guess more of a comment in order to think through the implications of that. I think we're potentially making a rod for our own back if the next report comes and for perfectly good reasons the rate has naturally fluctuated up. Well, I guess we don't really want to be in a position where we're saying it's really good when it goes down, it's really bad when it goes up. And yeah, I guess that's the point I wanted to make. But A-level absence, from my perspective, is probably a good thing because we don't want people to be coming in when they're sick. We want people to make use of their terms and conditions, which include sick pay, which allows them not to have to work when they don't need to. But I obviously understand the point if we can minimise it as much as possible. But yeah,
I'm after being schooled in that way, Cal. I'm more than happy to withdraw that because I can see the points.
Councillor Ashmore.
Or we could put maybe in the minutes that we are happy to see that there's a decrease in it, but leave the recommendations as a note because of exactly the reasons. I think Gal's pointed out, we don't want to make a rod for our own back or make people feel bad that they feel ill kind of thing.
Yeah, and given that the next report will likely see the winter seasonal variations, there is a very high probability there'll be an uptick in certain areas. Councillor Gerarda.
I was just wondering if a compromise is we could put welcome at bullet 3, because we welcome the activities and interventions undertaken to support attendance and improve health and well-being. I think that one's fair. What do you reckon?
Okay, so we're agreed then to amend recommendation C to change notes to welcome as that relates to the activities and interventions at the council, but we will leave the decrease in absence levels as a noting because those will likely be increases based on seasonal variations. Members, are there any other questions or comments before we move on to... No? Everyone happy? Super. So we've got 4 items that we're being asked to check on this, which is to note the decreased absence levels, to note the levels and causes of sickness absence across the council, to now welcome the activities and interventions undertaken, and to note the information regarding VIVUP. Members, are those all agreed? Super, thank you very much. We will move on then to agenda item 5, and it's back to Rochelle.
Thank you. So this paper is in relation to employment law reform. I think this was discussed at the last meeting. So just in terms of background, in the King's Speech in July 24 included the government's plans to make work pay, outlining changes to multiple aspects of the employment legislation. The Employment Bill was introduced into the House of Commons on the 10th of October 24 and proposed 28 measures. Those measures proposed in the bill fall into broad thematic areas, including family-friendly rights, fair pay, flexibility, equality at work, enforcing rights at work, and voice at work. It should be noted that there are a limited number of targeted consultations with a very short consultation period, seeking views on several areas, and they've been recently launched via the LGA, and they make their way down to us, and those are set out in Appendix 1. It's anticipated that the majority of the reforms in the bill will take effect no earlier than 2026, which seems a really long way away, but there's a lot of work to do between now and 2026, both on a functional level but also at a cultural change level and how we bring everyone along that journey with us. Appendix 2 provides further information on each of the measures proposed in the bill as set against the current PCC position, just to give you an insight into kind of where we are and what the change may look like. It is evolving all of the time, so this was accurate at the date of writing the report, but things are progressively changing and could change again once the consultations have been through. It should also be noted that there are a number of new areas of legislation that are also in the process of being launched, namely the Worker Protection Act 2023, which creates a duty to prevent sexual harassment from October 24, so last month, We've already briefed directors around all the changes and given them the presentation. We've also have a comms plan in place, and we're just finalising the first tranche of our training in relation to this, as well as the launch of our risk assessments to meet the requirements of the legislation. We will also need to work with our colleagues in democratic services because it applies to all of us, including members as well as officers. So this will be a very long piece of work because it sounds quite straightforward, and I think everyone thinks they already abide by this, but the actual legislation is quite, I wouldn't say onerous because it's necessary for us, but it takes it a lot further in terms of not just tackling sexual harassment allegations when they occur, but creating an environment where we actively prevent it happening in the first place, which is quite a shift in how we work with that. Then there's
Rochelle, do you mind if I very quickly interrupt you there? Sorry to jump in. Obviously, members' training, I believe, comes under the remit of the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee, so it might be worth just giving Councillor Holder a heads up that that's something that might need to be reviewed by GAS at one of their meetings in future.
No problem, we will do that. I think we're linked in with James and colleagues across there, aren't we? The second is Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Act 2023, which is expected to come in from April 2025. And we're working with colleagues in our own organisation, but also across the piece, so we're very closely linked with the LGA and South East employers and how everybody are tackling these new legislations coming in and what we're doing and how we can work collectively on that. The changes being proposed by the government are likely to have wide-reaching implications for the workplace relations and fundamental change to the employment legislation landscape. So although the summary table does suggest that in some areas that it's not applicable or we're already doing them, there are some really key areas where there will certainly be an impact for us. I'm happy to take questions, or unless you want me to go through them, but there's quite a few on there, so it's probably easier if I just take questions if anyone has any.
Councillor Gerarda?
Thank you, Rochelle, and thank you for laying everything out on such a handy table. It's really, really comprehensive and yeah, easy to go through, so I appreciate that. I just wondered if PCC has done any analysis so far to see if and how much money will be saved potentially with the extension around sick leave, which will obviously become a compulsory right from day one as opposed to after 3 days. And I wondered if the council would be responding to any of the consultations, or if, yeah, just or not.
So in terms of the sick pay, I'm not aware of that activity undertaken because in PCC we have a day one right already to sick pay, so I'm not anticipating that having a huge impact for us. But I can triple check that with payroll colleagues just to make sure. In terms of the consultations, yes, we do intend to participate. I think it's really important that we do. I know that directors have already been engaged locally, so Natasha might want to come in, but there's a couple of areas even in HR that we know we need to participate in because of the potential unintended consequences, and I can pick that up after Natasha's come in.
Yeah, just on that one, I mean, this is the first tranche of consultations, and the current range of consultations have limited applicability to us in the employment context. There are likely to be consultations that are going to have impacts for us as an employer, so we will be taking a view as the consultations become published as to which ones we will want to participate in or not, as the case may be. So at the moment it's a kind of, we'll wait and see what consultations emerge, and where it's relevant, then we will be engaging in it.
And so one example of that is fire and rehire, and that's not a tactic that's popular within local government. It's not something that we certainly would participate in at all. We consult, we engage, but there are some potential unintended consequences for that. So the lawyers are starting to pick apart, not ours, just nationally, the lawyers are starting to look at that. And essentially it's there to prevent people from being able to vary terms and conditions overnight with the threat of dismissal and re-engagement, not a practice that we would do. There's a potential unintended consequences to that with the wording as it currently stands that wouldn't enable the agility in the workplace to vary contracts of employment. So it might be that your operating hours need to change by 5 or 10 minutes, for example, and normally we would engage in consultation, seek agreement, and then worst case scenario, give notice of the change. if it's progressed at the moment as the way that it's worded, it would be very challenging to do that even in a really consultative way if you have one person. So I think there's likely to be some tweaks along the way, because even employers who behave appropriately, and they're not the ones I don't think that the government are trying to rule out with this. So that's one, for example, that we'd be keen to participate in, to say, I don't think you're trying to capture these scenarios. So if we just tweak the language, that would enable the agility across the workplace, as well as keeping the protection that they're trying to achieve.
Rochelle, has there been any consideration given in relation to external companies and their compliance with the changes, particularly in supply chain, and how that might impact us? I know we've obviously got social value criteria that have to be adhered to, and if other external organisations are not as robust in keeping up with the changes as we are, is there any potential knock-on impact there?
There's not the knock-on impact from an employment perspective because we're not the employer, but there's likely to be a knock-on impact in terms of simply us being able to get the supply in place that we need, and potential for costs, because the costs are likely to impact our supply chain in some of the areas more than it is for us. So we're conscious of our costs internally are likely to go up, because everyone will pass these costs on to someone else where they're not already being encountered. But from an employment perspective, this only applies to our workforce unless we're talking about things like the prevention of sexual harassment, where we do have the customer third-party angle as well. So lots of thought and work is going in, again, collaborating quite closely with colleagues in comms and marketing and across PCC. But from an employment perspective, it will just be our workforce. But we do need to think about the supply chains. And we are quite fortunate. Lots of the organisations that we are in partnership with do tend to look what we do first, wait for us to make the move, and then almost replicate and copy what we do, because they don't have the resources to be able to look into it as the detail as we have. So they consider, once we've made the move, it's considered quite safe. So we will get some who will just follow suit, and we'll achieve good practice via that. But other than that, I think it's just the financial angle that's been considered so far. But as I say, it's quite early on in the project. We're being drip-fed information quite slowly. So we can update you if that changes.
And going back to the prevention of sexual harassment item that you said came into force last month, obviously it sounds like it's moving very much from a reactive to a proactive set of behaviours, and it will be largely behavioural changes, but I'm guessing there's also going to be a change in the burden of reporting as well? Yeah,
so it's absolutely a shift in dynamic in terms of how we look at this. So there will be we need to look at from all angles, essentially, in terms of what's the manager's role in this and creating a safe working environment, that corporate values, behaviours, what we've already got in place and building on that. We also have to create safe avenues for people to be able to report that, and that really will be via a multitude of different ways. That could be via the manager, could be the trade union, it could be via a similar route to reporting violent incidents, which is via kind of health and safety, or we could have it via the whistleblowing process, kind of whichever, or directly to HR, whoever the person feels more comfortable being able to report that to. But it's really about doing all the work before we get to the point where something is reported. So currently our main focus, as I said, is finalising the training, and which sounds quite simple, but we've got a really diverse workforce, and it's not just a case of being able to roll out training and saying you've all been trained now. The training must be specific to your working environment, so these scenarios that we talk about in the training must be relatable. So if you think of the dynamics in the workplace, where we've got kind of professionals who are in office space, and then we have people out in the community, and then people in remote settings. So trying to bring something to all of those different places so that they can recognise in themselves what this means. It's been a bit of a challenge. And then we've got the risk assessment side of it. There will be the corporate risk assessment. So what do we do with our buildings? What do we do with our facilities to make them as safe as we can? And then there'll be risk assessments for things potentially like large events, especially where we've got perhaps overnight stays, or perhaps where alcohol is permitted, which is very limited circumstances, but those sorts of things. So yes, it's across the board. It sounds quite simple, but and I think everyone thinks, well, obviously we should be doing it, but the shift does require us to have a lot more in place than we currently have.
Councillor Sanders.
Thanks, Stuart. I agree with Charlotte's idea of having a cost-benefit analysis of everything. I think that will help us when each of our groups get round to formulate our ideas for the budget to come February, and I think doing it now rather than later would help us a lot. It's very, very pleasing to see the council is already doing much of this work. I think that's a good thing. I think it's also many of these things that are in here are also absolutely excellent and are the best things to do. So I think as an administration we welcome this approach and we welcome this particular bill. But it is that cost-benefit analysis. I've already had one charity come to me and say our bill is going to go up by £500,000 next year. And could you fund it, please? Which is a difficult conversation to have with the voluntary sector in the city. So I think I agree with Charlotte, the cost-benefit analysis in terms of the money that comes from doing this stuff, and I would add in the national insurance rise of businesses as well to help us with our budget going along, would be very useful. Just so that we can plan more and we can know what the impact is and that we can adjust things accordingly, not just for when it comes to the full council budget and the council tax rise. We know that much of the increase for local government is based on a 5% rise in council tax. We know that, we understand that, that's been there for years. But we want to try and make sure that we've got an honest assessment both of the costs of doing this and of the financial benefits of doing this for a safer and a more confident workforce. We know that when our Lib Dem colleagues in South Cambridgeshire did a 4-day week, they saved money, which is why they were barred from doing it by the Tories. But that sort of stuff is really, really helpful. So I totally agree with Charlotte's assessment around having a cost and benefit analysis, preferably long before the budget gets into view, so that we can have a good idea. But I would also include the national insurance rise as well, because it doesn't affect us. And pleasingly, it doesn't affect the police forces, but it does affect charities and it does affect our contractors. So I think an overall cost-benefit analysis of all the things that are coming down the track would be very, very helpful. And I thank Charlotte for putting that forward.
What I was hoping to invite Rochelle to do was at the next meeting, if there were any further legislative changes that we need to be aware of, to bring them back to us. I suppose if there are any, then if there's any early indications of cost benefit that we can, I imagine it will take quite a while, and where we don't actually know where the legislation is going to end up being finalised, it might not be worth doing that because information we get given might end up changing in the interim. Does that make sense? Natasha, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to make. We've got very limited detail at the moment on some of these measures, so it's probably a bit early to do any kind of cost-benefit analysis. But what we can do, what we've already done, is to say that these are areas that are just not going to be relevant to us. So we can automatically exclude a raft of those. And then there will be areas where we can identify these are the areas where we can do a cost-benefit analysis once we have the appropriate level of detail. On the basis that most of these changes are not going to be in place until 2026, it's likely that it isn't going to be next year's budget, it's going to be the following year's budget that will likely be impacted. And of course the national insurance increase is a part of the budget set by the government rather than anything associated with the Employment Rights Bill. But absolutely, we can feed that back to finance colleagues for them to progress on that score. What we will do clearly is, as more detail becomes available, we will bring reports back to this committee to keep you informed as the bill progresses through its various stages through Parliament.
Super, thank you very much. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for that, Natasha. That's really, really helpful. I realise that lots of this is all done in the devil is in the detail, as always. But definitely, I think things like the Fair Pay Agreement, which in principle is a great thing, but certainly that impact, I mean, I've seen some analysis from Moody's today, which says that all that stuff is going to eat up about 45% of the extra £1,300 million worth of grants that are coming our way for social care, which is mildly worrying, I have to say. So I think an assessment of that and other relevant details will help us with the budget, recognising that we've still got some detail to come. We don't quite know what's coming in 2026 and what's coming earlier. But the principle of having that sort of cost-benefit analysis would be highly, highly helpful, I think, to all of us, so that we have an honest assessment of what's coming and we can try and work out our principles accordingly. Is that all right?
Members, any other questions? Councillor Corkery.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks again for the report. I also like the table. It does make it easy to kind of comprehend and take any information. So, thumbs up for those. In terms of the content of the report, I guess to be welcomes the legislation that's coming forward. I think personally I'd like to see it go a lot further. I think there's some kind of missed opportunities here, but it's certainly a step in the right direction after many years of legislation on this issue going the other way. It's nice now to see a bit of pushback and suddenly kind of workers' rights are at least on the agenda and being discussed. A few things just to pick out and I guess comment upon, and then a question stroke comment. I guess one of the key things that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in terms of local government, but also kind of wider implications, are the discussion around the social care fair pay agreement and discussions around collective, kind of sectoral collective bargaining, as they call it, which is obviously national negotiation kind of with all employers based on a shared set of pay in terms and conditions, which is, I think, is something that has been proven to work in terms of driving up pay and terms and conditions, obviously through the history of the UK, but also it's commonplace in lots of places in Europe, for example. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out, and obviously will be of interest to this committee because we've spent many an hour, as well as full council, talking about things like the living wage and how that impacts upon our supply chain and, for example, care workers. So yeah, we'll be interested to see how that plays out and what the implications are going forward. Something also, I guess, to pick up on in terms of the new regulatory agency that's going to be created to try and pull together the different aspects of enforcing employment legislation, which is something, I think is something that's very much needed because the existing provisions are barely existent and don't really do the job. And whether maybe in the fullness of time there's opportunities for local government to play into that. Clearly it's not going to be kind of formally part of this agency, but I'm sure the council does kind of support national regulatory organisations in other aspects. And particularly on something like this, where I think obviously a focus on some of the kind of worst offenders are probably going to be maybe kind of small businesses who maybe don't know what they should be doing, maybe in need of extra support, or some people that do know what they should be doing and don't. But it's that kind of local intelligence that maybe can be fed through local government into some kind of new enforcement agency. So there may well be an opportunity for us there as well. And just the last point I wanted to make around using public procurement to raise standards and employment rights. Again, this kind of feeds in discussions we've had around the living wage, but I mean, I again would like to see it go further. I don't think it should just be about, for example, us potentially putting the living wage into procurement if we can. There's also other aspects which I'm not entirely sure, and this is very much a procurement issue, so I appreciate people might not necessarily know the detail here, but I would be interested to know exactly what requirements or requests we put into our existing social value policy around procurement with contractors. My understanding from previous discussions are it is things like number of apprenticeships, where contractors live. I would like to see it go further than that, because I mean, for example, obviously living wage we've discussed in great detail. There's other aspects such as kind of sick pay, holiday pay, but also a key one for me, based on the kind of sentiment within the wider legislation, would be trade union recognition. There are contractors that the council works with who are quite actively anti-trade union or just don't engage with trade unions on any level. If we could perhaps use our procurement processes to encourage, or my preference would be mandate those people to have a trade union that they recognise and work with for the benefit of their employees, then yeah, that would be something I think that we should be looking to do. So yeah, I mean, if people do know the answers to kind of the details of it, then I'd be glad to know, but I appreciate there may be something to take away because it's probably more of a procurement question than a HR. Sasha?
Well, I could probably help with some of it, but not at a very detailed level. So I provide the strategic lead for our social value work across the council. And while we do factor in specific areas in our policy around sort of the apprenticeships, as well as other aspects of increasing the employability and sort of keeping the pound in the city as well, and employing local people, those will be specifics that are in the policy and that will be measured as part of the assessments of different bids when we go out to tender. But what we also do is have a very dynamic and active dialogue with our supply chain. So just this last year, for example, we've had a focus on employability specifically for people with learning disabilities, and we've had workshops with our supply chain, and I suppose acted almost as a broker, if you like, between some of our beneficiaries, so some of our charities and services that provide services to people with learning disabilities, and some of our employers, some of whom already employ people with learning disabilities and some of whom don't, but who are keen to learn from others who do around how they can engage on that agenda. And certainly that particular workshop was extremely well received. And well attended. So it's not the kind of thing that you would enshrine in policy, but it is absolutely the sort of thing that we are actively engaged in when we work with our supply chain. So there's I suppose the procurement stage when we're going out to secure new contracts, but then once we have those suppliers in place, we also actively work with them to address the workforce issues and challenges, increase employability from across a number of different vulnerable groups that we might have in the city, whether that's people with learning disabilities, ex-offenders, young people who've not been in employment or education for a long period of time, a range of different categories of individual to really increase employability of people across the city and provide different entry routes, understand the barriers to employment and those sorts of things. So we are actively engaged around workforce issues with that supply chain and happy to take on board any other suggestions that members might have around how we can engage with our suppliers more broadly on a wider range of issues.
Thank you. Natasha, I just want to quickly pick up on a point that Councillor Corkery made around small business compliance. Obviously, I'm very aware of the Council's small business support offering that goes on. I imagine that certainly in a reactive way, they'll be offering advice, but I'm wondering if it's worth just double checking if they're doing that in a proactive way as well. So going out to local businesses through the partnerships that we have in across the city. I know we've got the business networking that gets run as well, making sure that these businesses are aware of the changes that are going to impact them. Because obviously a healthy business community in the city is good for everybody. And we have, I think it's something like 8,000 businesses registered in the city, 5,500 of which are SMEs. So there is definitely going to be a large onus on getting the smaller ones who maybe just focus all their time on surviving to make sure that they're actually aware of the changes that they're going to have to put up with as well. But that's not for the remit for this committee, that's for business support to look after.
But I can update, and apologies to my colleague because I've not had a chance to update Rochelle on this, but I have been asked, so we have discussed all of these changes as a team of directors, and we will be sharing this table with directors to disseminate with our management population so they can do exactly that. They can understand what's coming down the line, but they can also work with the partners that they work with to, share as much as possible because, yeah, absolutely recognising that Portsmouth as a place will benefit from some of the insight that if we're able to share. And of course it's...
The council does not exist in a vacuum.
And this is a public document, so, and we can also obviously point people to the papers for this committee today.
Super, thank you very much. Members, any other questions on this item, or are we all happy to note the report? So noted, thank you very much. Rochelle, if you want to head off, you're more than welcome, or you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, it's up to you. Moving on to agenda item 6, I'd like to invite Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Service, to introduce the report on workforce profile.
Thank you. So I won't go into the depths of detail on this, but really just to let the committee have the summary information. First workforce profile that we did was in 2019 data. This report reflects the data of our workforce profile for the year 2023. It's really important that we do collect this information because it really helps provide an evidence base for some of our decision making, and obviously you will have heard earlier from Rochelle around some of our causes of sickness absence. That is reflected in some of the workforce profile around particularly how our bodies experience wear and tear is reflective of the focus that we have on musculoskeletal, the age range and predominance of female in the workforce around some of the work we're doing around menopause and perimenopause, but also it's mirrored in what we're seeing here, and the report also compares us with the local population. So providing that evidence base is really important to help us develop our action plans and strategies as well. So in summary then, the report shows that we remain consistent in terms of our age profile, our gender profile, and our ethnic origin of our workforce. So we remain underrepresented in terms of our ethnic minority groups. We remain underrepresented with our younger age groups. We remain overrepresented in the sort of the older, the 45 to 64 age group, and underrepresented with males in the workforce. And that's sort of a comparison with the city demographic. Although the proportion of staff who live within the city boundary is showing a steady increase. So back during the COVID period, I think because of the ability to work in a hybrid way, we saw quite a change where more people were living outside of a commutable distance to Portsmouth, but we're seeing that revert back to pre-COVID levels. I think it's important to note that the gender pay gap is closing as well. So that's good news, and doing good work there. And we're also seeing an increase in people working full-time. That's up from what it was. It was about 60% of people working full part-time in 2019, and it's remained consistent at higher than that at 65% for the last 2 years. And I think that reflects probably the cost of living as well, where people are working harder, longer, more hours. We saw a slight decrease in the number of employees leaving, so turnover was down by 2%, but it's still high at 15%, and I think that reflects a common picture across public sector and the labour market in general. And we've only had a limited improvement on the staff recording disabilities. The caveat to all of this, of course, is this is a report based on what employees record. We do ask staff to self-record against protected characteristics. So if they choose not to, then we're obviously not able to report on that. So this does reflect what people have self-reported. But obviously the detail is available as an appendix, but also available online, and the link to that is included in the report. So I'll pause there for any questions.
Natasha, thank you. I just want to quickly pick up on the point about the increase in full-time roles and the gender pay gap. Because I remember at a previous meeting, we said that part of, not the whole, but certainly part of the reason for the gender pay gap was we have a predominance of women in part-time roles. Now, if those women are now taking up full-time roles, could that account for the narrowing of the gender pay gap in part?
In part, yes, absolutely. I think probably also reflects the fact that we have some senior females in recently in post, so that will also impact on it. But the more that we can do to promote more women in more senior roles working will all contribute to an improved picture.
Super, thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Drada.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again for the report. I just wondered on section 8, where it refers to staff turnover. I just wanted to check to see if exit interviews were sort of common practice, and if they are, if we sort of glean any trends from that about why people are leaving, and also just a question about if this level of turnover is just typical of local authorities, or sort of where we stand compared to other local authorities. Thank you.
We do exit interviews, but again, it's a choice as to staff whether they want to do an exit interview. We do know that one of the common reasons for staff leaving, one of them is around career progression and the others are around pay. So we know these are particular challenges for us as an organisation. The rates of pay for similar roles in other organisations, both local government and private sector, tend to be higher than they are in Portsmouth. it does reflect, I'd say, both a local government common picture, but is also reflecting the state of the labour market currently.
No further questions, comments? No? Excellent. In which case, members, are we happy to note the report? Fantastic, so noted. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. Thank you all very much for coming along and for all your contributions. Have a excellent Christmas, because our next meeting is in the new year.